Hello everyone, and welcome to Teacher Development Webinars. My name is Amanullah Sand. I facilitate virtual programs at Teacher Development Webinars. And first of all, shout out to all YouTube subscribers. We are a family of more than 3,000 subscribers now. It's all because of you. I would say keep supporting us and keep subscribing and sharing Teacher Development Webinars. We still need some 3,000 watchers for this YouTube monetization policy. So I'd appreciate if you could share this with your students, with your colleagues, and anyone who would be interested in our webinars. Thank you so much. As you all know, Teacher Development Webinars is a social action project to support teachers and educators around the world with professional development opportunities. It is an initiative using the rise in online PD to connect people from around the world with professional development opportunities. And in this webinar, Connecting in a Disconnected World, the Power of Empathy in the English Language Classroom, will present ideas of ways to incorporate intercultural competency through the power of empathy in English language classrooms and beyond. Now, it's my pleasure and privilege to introduce Inga Albense for this webinar. Ms. Inga Albense is a PhD student specializing in international education and education leadership at George Mason University in Virginia, USA. With a BA in International Business and Eastern Philosophy and MA in Seoul, she has worked throughout her life to connect cultures and bridge culture barriers through education and travel. As an entrepreneur and a business owner of C2C travel and an ESL professor and instructor in higher education and K-12 setting, Ms. Abansik works daily with cultures around the globe to break down walls and build bridges to provide opportunities for understanding and collaboration. Thanks very much, Inga. We are happy to have you at Teacher Development Webinar.
Thank you so much for having me, Emmanuel, and welcome to all of you here who are joining us from all around the world today. It is amazing to see such a wonderful response. And I'm giving everybody a big warm welcome from Washington, D.C., where it is about 6 a.m. and it's still dark outside. So here we are. I see that we're connecting from all around the world, and this is absolutely, this is fantastic. So thank you for being here. I'm going to go ahead and share my screen with you so that we can get started.
Yep. Meanwhile, we can let you know that we have people from Argentina, Sri Lanka, Philippines, greetings from Philippines, Azerbaijan, Pakistan, Mexico. Great, such a diverse audience.
This is what I love. This is what I love. And as an ESL professor here in the United States, this is like my classroom. My classroom is a global classroom every day, and I have people and students with me every day from all around the world. So I'm so happy to have this opportunity here with all of you today to be talking, a little bit more on teacher development. If you are not a teacher, it is okay for you to be here and listen, because this is all about connections today and how we're able to connect in this global society. So let me see if I can get my slides to advance. Okay, so I'll start out today with just a little bit about my background. I know that Emmanuel did just give me a wonderful introduction, and I thank you so much for that. So for those of you, I'll just add on a little, for those of you who might not know who I am, my name is Inga Urbancic. As he mentioned, I am still a student. We are forever students. We are learners, we are teachers, and we are students. And so I am a PhD student at George Mason University, and I'm specializing in international education leadership. My master's degree is in teaching English as a second language from Notre Dame University. And my bachelor's degree was in a double major in international business and Eastern philosophy. So my background and kind of the common thread throughout my life has always been connecting people, connecting cultures, international relations, really, and how people connect around the world. Professionally, as you see, I have a business background as well as a teaching background. So I have been a professor at the Virginia Tech Language and Culture Institute, also at Northern Virginia Community College, and I'm teaching at Fairfax County Public Schools at the moment. So this is a K through 12 school here in Fairfax County, Virginia. For my business background, I'm certified as a project management professional and also K through 12 certified in the state of Maryland and Virginia to be an ESOL teacher. I am also an entrepreneur, so I have created several organizations working to connect people and cultures around the world, one of which is C2C Travel, which is connecting Americans with countries like Cuba and the Emirates to be able to create opportunities for cultural understanding and authentic face-to-face travel. Also the founder of English Works USA, which is an online platform for English instruction. And most recently for PATN, which is the Pakistani American Teachers of English Network, which is an organization that I developed to help bridge cultures and provide collaborative opportunities for both English teachers in America as well as in Pakistan. So this is a little bit about me, but we're going to go ahead and jump in. So our session today, we take a look at our session today, we're going to be talking about the power of empathy and international and intercultural competence. So we're going to start off our session with a little bit of a background on intercultural competence for people who might not know what that is. We're going to describe it. We're going to talk a little bit theoretical so that you have a little bit more of a framework about kind of where it comes from. And we're also going to then move on and talk about empathy as a whole and the meaning of empathy. What is empathy? And practically speaking, how we can use this in our language classrooms. We'll wrap up the session with some areas to consider, perhaps some red flags as we're looking to incorporate this into our classrooms. And finally, I'll be opening it up for questions. So without any ado, we will go ahead and get started. So the power of connections. So I recently returned from a 2-week trip to Karachi, Pakistan. This was my first trip since COVID started. And the country and the city of Karachi could not have been more different than the quiet neighborhood that I'm living in right now in a suburb of Washington, D.C. So the climate, the dress, the religion, the food, the sense of time, the traffic, even going around the city at times on a motorcycle. It could not have been more different to me than the world that I live in here with my family on a day-to-day basis. But the question is, how was it that after leaving this magical yet completely different place, how was I able to form so many friendships and connections with Pakistani people, right? What was it on both sides that made us want to connect and to understand and learn and explore each other in our different ways of life, right? What made us interested in sharing what we know and being interested in the sense of the other? When I left Pakistan, I left with a suitcase full of Pakistani clothes and dress that I had worn throughout my trip, and also a heart full of memories and new friends and connections that continue to grow today. So what is it about these connections? Okay, this was just most recently in Pakistan, but throughout my life, I've grown up in a multicultural home. I've had the opportunity to live and work and study abroad around the world, in Thailand, in Germany, Belgium, Cuba, Pakistan, South Africa, United Arab Emirates, so many different countries and so many different cultures. And I've seen time and time again the inherent unique qualities between all of these countries that unite us as humans, right? Despite the many outward differences that we see in race and gender and religion and customs. So this importance of understanding each other, in my opinion, is now greater than ever, because we're living in a global society where it's important for us to have the tools and the skills to have not only our own voices heard, but to have them heard in a global village with equal footing and respect for each other. So when we're looking at the power of connections, I see that through these connections, we're breaking down walls and barriers that divide us, and we're finding common ground to collaborate and unify among this diversity that exists between us. And it's important to note that this collaboration and unification, it's not at the expense of a dominant or submissive relationship. This is not saying that the Western culture is dominating over other cultures. What I'm saying is that it is a way to, these connections are a way to truly appreciate and understand and accept the strengths and beauty that each of us bring to the table from each of our unique cultures to unite and contribute to the greater good of our, really, a global village. So this is going to lead us into what is called intercultural competence, all right? So as you see, I've always been interested in cultures and how people connect. And if I take a look and see that through this intersection of face-to-face travel experiences, my educational background in teaching ESL here with students from all around the world, I see that there is this common thread that pulls us together as humanity. So last year in my doctoral classes at George Mason University, I took a class with Dr. April Maddox Foster, and it was called Intercultural Competence. And at that point, I had what I'd like to call my own aha moment. I think we've all had those, and I hope we continue to have many more of these throughout our life. But I had my aha moment, which is when I first learned of this term called intercultural competence. And what I realized is that all of a sudden there was a whole field that had to do with my passion, which was connecting people and how we connect around the world. And as I mentioned, given the global society, in some ways there's even, turbulence that exists in the world today between different cultures. There's a lot of cooperation, but there's also turbulence that does exist. When we look at this and we see how we're continuing to unite as a global society, this whole idea of intercultural competence is important, really now more than ever. So if we look at intercultural competence for those of you who have been around for a while, as I have, this is kind of a bridge from what we used to call communicative competence. So if anybody was around when I started my career in the early 90s, I was working for a language company called Berlitz. Maybe some of you might have heard of Berlitz before. And it's a company that is focused on teaching languages. And our big thing was communicative competence. It was teaching the world how to unite through language and through understanding each other's language. And so communicative competence was what we did. However, we have now continued to grow and evolve. And we've realized that it's not enough just to learn how to speak each other's language, right? It's not enough if you are English teachers, if you are language learners, if you're travelers, whatever it might be, it's not enough anymore just to learn the language of the other country. There is a whole nother layer of connections called intercultural competence, which are important to address. So this is what we're going to be talking about today. So intercultural competence, if you've heard this before, you might have heard it mentioned as intercultural communication competence. You may have heard it as intercultural effectiveness, but the reality is that the overall meaning is that it's about global connections, creating meaning. Okay, so creating meaning through these connections that we have. It has been around for a while, right? I mean, it might have changed terminology and the name might be different, but it has a background not only in education, but also in psychology, sociology, anthropology. Many different fields have been interested in the human element of connection and how we do this. So it's the way of seeing and connecting in the world around us and recognizing that we have our own unique traits. Each one of us who is here today, you are your own unique person. We have our own unique traits. However, we can find common ground that unites each of us through humanity. And intercultural competence, it plays a vital role in our actions as humans across societies and cultures. And when we look at it, we can see some common traits or factors that are involved in creating intercultural competence, which are things like flexibility, right? Being open to different ideas, and a willingness to learn. So there's a lot of people in this field. If you start to look into it, there's a lot of researchers, there's a lot of names, but one of the ones who I like the most is, her name is Darla Deardorff. So she's one just worth mentioning here, who is really kind of a pioneer in this field of intercultural competence and worth mentioning. So if we're looking at intercultural competence, I'm going to talk to you just for a second with a little bit of theory, not too much because we're going to get into a practical application, but just for those of you who are interested in knowing a little bit more about where it came from. So as I mentioned, it started around the 1960s, this whole idea, and there were a number of researchers who worked to develop different models and frameworks of intercultural competence, which, by the way, you'll see that an overarching theory of intercultural competence still does not currently exist. There's multiple theories, multiple frameworks of how to put this together, each of which are inherently beneficial to us in incorporating this in our classrooms, in incorporating this in our workplace, but there's not yet one overarching theory. I'm listing here some different examples of different models of intercultural competence that do exist in the world today. We have models by Deardorff, we have models by, there's a number of different people that you can look and you can see that they've been developing. One of them started in 1986 to 1997, right, all the way up through. So this is really evolving, and it's a field that is really still wide open for any of you who are interested in this field and jumping in and sharing your own, perspectives on intercultural competence. If we look at one of these models just briefly, I just want to show you kind of what comes up with a model of intercultural competence. Like, what are we looking for, right? So this is the Fantini model, all right? So the Fantini model is looking at 8 different attributes of what is intercultural competence, right? So if you were to say, I I'm interculturally competent, right? If you're going to say this or you're going to try to develop this in your classroom, what are some of the attributes that you'd be looking for is what this model is suggesting. One of them, the top, of course, is empathy, which is what we're going to be talking about today. Things like openness, patience, right? I want you to think through each of these as I mention them and just see how each of these attributes are important in connecting with the world and with connecting with different cultures and perspectives around the world, okay? Empathy, openness, patience, curiosity, right? Do you want to know about something other? Flexibility is huge, right? Learning about a different culture. When I was in Pakistan, I could not sit and just say I wanted my life to be like it is here in Northern Virginia, right? I had to be flexible and adapt to the local lifestyle. Suspended judgment is huge, right? Suspended judgment meaning, you know, we can't just jump to conclusions and say, oh, this is bad, this is terrible, or oh, this is great. It's observing, right? Tolerance for ambiguity, understanding that we might not have an answer. There might be things we just don't understand, and that has to be okay. And finally, humor, being able to laugh and not take things quite so seriously, because through intercultural competence in this field, we're constantly learning and growing, right? And adapting. So these are 8 attributes according to Fantini's model that are components of intercultural competence. So he has 2 other areas. One are just interrelated areas. So this is now, so we have the attributes of what would create a person or an organization or a school or a classroom to have the traits or the attributes to create intercultural competence. But the interrelated areas, also we have to see that it's about forming and making relationships, right? My network of friends, colleagues, teachers from Pakistan really was able to increase through this whole idea of intercultural competence. But it's not just about learning, it's actually then engaging, and you're forming and maintaining relationships. There is communication without disorientation, right? Meaning let's just have a focused discussions with each other. And obviously cooperation for a mutual benefit, right? So somehow what I am receiving from my colleagues in Pakistan, from my students from around the world, from the time I've been in Cuba or the Emirates or in Thailand or in Europe, there's something that I am receiving. However, I am also then giving. And so there becomes mutual cooperation, that we are becoming almost the glue to each other, like magnets, right? We're giving and taking from each other. And the 4 dimensions that he mentions of intercultural competence are really knowledge, skills, attitudes, and awareness. These are 4 different areas that just in general, we can look and see how to develop knowledge, how to develop skills in this area, how to adjust our attitudes and our awareness. So this is an example, in theory, of a model of intercultural competence. And as I mentioned, there are several different models that exist, all right? So if you're looking to apply this in your classroom, there are several different models that exist, and you can kind of pick and choose really what works for you in your classes. So we keep moving on here. We're going to now move over to empathy, okay? Because today's focus is really empathy. So if we look at this key relationship that exists between empathy and intercultural competence, we can see that researchers have identified empathy as being one of the key instruments in establishing cross-cultural connections and adaptation. It is, the ability to put ourselves in another person's shoes is empathy, right? It's when we have empathy, what researchers have found is that it allows us to increase cooperation, problem solving, and intercultural effectiveness. So we inherently, through empathy, positive attitudes start to develop with people from different cultures through the power of empathy. Even if there has been no prior experience of intercultural competence. So even if we have a student or we have someone who has never been involved in anything culturally, globally, whatever that might be, right? Empathy has been shown to be a positive contributor to building these connections, right? So empathy, if you're looking to create this in your classroom in any way, empathy is a key component of any program that is designed to facilitate the development of intercultural competence. So what exactly is empathy, right? What is empathy? And empathy on the surface, on its own, can be very difficult to grasp. How do we describe empathy, right? But some of the ways that we can look at empathy is, first of all, just the practice of imagining ourselves in the shoes of the other person, right? How is it that they feel? How do they feel about these different things? Empathy has been known to be the bridge to civility, right? Where we're feeling our way into everything. So we're using compassion. We're using our sense of feel to connect with someone else. Sometimes we'll hear people say, oh, stop feeling so much. You need to just lead with your head or lead in this way. And, oh, she feels too much, right? But this idea of feeling is connecting. You're feeling because we are creating these connections through empathy. We're trying to understand how it feels to be in that person's shoes, right? It implies that we have an emotional connection into the perspective of the other person. It's not just saying, okay, I understand how you feel. It's that I'm actually also feeling how you feel, right? It's about, if you're super happy about something, we're in a different culture, you're super happy, and I jump in and I actually feel and experience the happiness for you. Or if you're going through a hardship, or there's something happening in your culture, or something that is very devastating, through empathy, I'm connecting with you not only through my head and knowing that you're hurting, but actually I, through the emotional connection, begin to hurt as well. Okay, this is the emotional, what we're calling the emotional participation into the person's perspective. It is the moral glue. Empathy is the moral glue that binds us together as humans. Without the power of empathy, society will crumble. This is why empathy is so important. In my perspective, it's one of the most important components of intercultural competence, and it's something that we should encourage in our classrooms, empathy. So is it possible, right? Is it even, how do we develop this? If we have students, we have people, like, is it possible to develop empathy? So researchers have shown, and they've kind of broken down strategies and methods for implementing and developing empathy, believe it or not. So it's not necessarily just an inherent trait that we can have with ourselves, but there's actually a process that we can see that is in the development of empathy. So one of the processes that we're looking at is first, just the awareness. The awareness. And this is very what we're calling a passive association of my lived body within your body, right? So it's an awareness of the other. This is how empathy starts. And it's this awareness of ourselves as me putting myself into your situation, understanding your mental state, right? This is, as I mentioned earlier, this is about your, in your mind, in our mind, we are putting our own thoughts and emotions into how you're feeling. This is called understanding our mental states. And then understanding and communicating, right? Part of empathy actually becomes the idea that even though I am able to put myself into your mind emotionally and connect with you in that way, I can communicate with you about it, but there's also an understanding that we're separate, right? Even though I'm able to connect with you through the power of empathy, there is an understanding that we are separate. And finally, there becomes what we're calling an ethical responsibility and affection. What ends up happening is that there's an ethical responsibility that comes back to yourself as a person, right? And understanding my role in the connection with you, taking care of myself through my own experiences so that I can continue to connect with you. So this is an example in a very theoretical way of how empathy can be developed within us. So the point of today is to see, how do we develop it in our classroom? Okay. How do we develop this in our classroom? So, and as I mentioned, for any of you who are on here today who are not teachers, this is applicable across all fields, right? So when we're looking in our workplace, when we're looking in our families, when we're looking even within ourselves, right, as working to develop ourselves as interculturally competent global citizens, what are these inherent traits that we're looking for? All right. Well, the first is having a global respect and dignity for humankind. This is a foundation. So developing this, if we're looking specifically in our classroom, it is ensuring that every student in our classroom is respected and is able to feel dignified, to be proud of who he or she is, right? We have students in our classrooms from all different socioeconomic backgrounds. Here in the US, in my ESL classrooms, they're coming from all around the world. They're all different cultures. And it's important that everyone is respected and is proud of who they are, and they feel that, right? There's not favorites. Global respect and dignity. It's very important. Secondly, what we're calling mutuality. All right, mutuality is important. And what this is, when we're incorporating this in our classroom, all right, mutuality is the notion, the idea that we're trying to find common understanding between this cultural encounter. All right. So if we're in our English language classroom, it is the idea that we are looking for similarities to connect us, even with global dignity and respect of who we are as a person, of our own unique identity. Mutuality and common understanding is working to create these connections with things that we all have in common, things like the concept of beauty, things like the etiquette, telling jokes, dance, right? Making music, feeling emotions of anger, participation in sports, feeling emotions of pleasure, right? Food. These are all things that we have in common. So it's working to find this kind of common understanding in our classes with our students, all right? And finally, it's trust, okay? There needs to be an idea of trust. It is the bond, trust is the bond that holds societies together. So while we are looking at global respect, dignity, mutuality, common understanding, underlying all of these needs to be trust. That the student is trusting us and we are trusting the student. That there is a certain trust that is developed. And this is important in order to bond our societies together. So what I want you to think about, all right, and I know many of you are teaching English in all different parts of the world, and maybe you're wondering, you know, what does this have to do with English, right? But the reason I'm talking about this as also an English teacher, as an English professor, is because our classrooms as English teachers, whether you are teaching English in Pakistan, in Indonesia, in Mexico, wherever it is, if you're a language teacher, if you're teaching English, Spanish, whatever it is, this is the prime area to be developing intercultural competence, right? We have an opportunity in these classrooms to implement culture. It's not just about learning the grammar and the vocabulary and the sentence structure. Yes, that's one part of it. But we are teaching our students how to be global citizens, and we're working to equip them with the tools that they need so that they can stand up when they graduate, feel confident, and be able to connect with other people around the world in a meaningful way. We are educating our future leaders, right? We need to make sure that all of them have a voice while preserving their own host country and culture. So let's take a look and see how can we implement this in our classroom, okay? What I want you to think about first is that many classrooms, you know, I think people on here, we might be teaching K through 12, we might be teaching higher ed, but what we find is that, remember, we live in a global society, right? And these opportunities exist to teach and learn intercultural competence in addition to learning English. At many of our schools, we have study abroad programs and different opportunities, okay? If you're teaching in higher ed, or in high schools, or even in teacher development programs where perhaps you had an opportunity to study abroad in a different country, to be able to truly experience what it is truly in that culture. These are very, very good ways of implementing intercultural competence, and also diversity programs. Depending on what country you're in and what your student body looks like, the opportunity to create programs that unite diverse cultures, diverse religions, create opportunities for intercultural competence. So things like this, if you're thinking about these and how you can implement this in your school, these are some high-level areas and programs that can exist or that you can create in your school setting, all right? Then specifically in your classroom, all right, if you're looking to incorporate intercultural competence in addition to teaching your content, we can look at the different activities that you are presenting And you can ask yourself these questions, right? So for example, how are different viewpoints represented? So if I'm teaching a content, I want to know, is it only coming from one voice? If I'm giving a story in English, like who's telling the story and what is the voice it's coming from? Is it only telling one side of the story, or is it telling multiple sides of the story? If it's only telling one side of the story, it's important to recognize that this is only one part of the story, and to let your students know this is one viewpoint. There are other ones. Today, we're going to be talking about this point of view, okay? So that the students do not believe that this is a universal truth. We need to know who is telling whose story. Am I telling my own story, or am I telling your story from my perspective? Right? Look at your curriculum, look at your material. What is the significance of deeper points of human connection around the topic, right? So look at your topic and see, how are we able to connect? Are there opportunities for deeper engagement in these different areas that we discuss that comprise intercultural competence? What else do we need to know about this topic, right? So perhaps the topic only has one point of view. Well, let's talk to our students about that this is just one point of view, and challenge our students to go out and find different points of view. What does this culture think about this in history? What does this culture think about it? What is the perspective from this one? So that our students will start to learn that what we have in our knowledge of the world is based upon this point of view. I am a Western American woman. My point of view comes from being a Western American woman. However, it's important for me to understand and to learn about non-Western education systems, non-Western cultures, non-Western religions, right? In order for me to understand where I'm coming from. My perspective might be coming from a Western view, but it's only one view. And there are all these other ones that exist as well. And they are equally as important to have in the discussion, okay? So these are questions we can ask, right? What are some of the common goals and purposes with the topic? So these are things when we're looking at our classrooms that we can work to incorporate intercultural competence. Okay, of course, just like anything else, there's challenges, all right? And this is the last thing we're going to talk about here today, but we have the different challenges and what exists, what impedes us as humans, right? As humans, what causes us not to create these environments of intercultural competence? If it was so easy, we would have world peace. If this was so easy, it wouldn't be a problem at all, right? But if we look, we can see that, first of all, one of the main areas of concern are existing stereotypes and prejudices that exist. Okay, we have the media, we have things that we've heard, things like this that can create negative inferences. So all of a sudden, because of stereotypes and prejudices, our student, ourselves, whoever might already have a negative feeling about something. This can hinder intercultural competence. So it's important first to understand ourselves. Understand, do we have stereotypes? Do we have prejudices? Right? We've all grown up with things like implicit bias. We have these implicit ideas about a culture. What are Americans like, right? So we have to start to break that down if there is a negative inference, so that we can have that openness and flexibility. Also, an over-reliance on human universals, okay? This is another challenge. And what this means is that we can say all people are like this, right? So all people do this. This is what people do, all right? So if we start to think like that all people do this, we're not paying any attention or giving credit to the cultural differences and nuances that exist in cultures. We might all on the surface do something, but we all do it differently. based on our own unique culture. So it's important not to do sweeping universals over all of humanity, right? This is an area of caution. Also, just a lack of awareness, right? A lack of awareness, right? Until I get to know a different culture and experience a different culture, I don't know, right? Underlying how they think, how they what are their values. I don't necessarily know that, and I can't just assume that I know that going in. So it's important for me to understand myself. If I have a lack of awareness, we are always learning. I'm not claiming to be an expert, a cultural expert, because I'm constantly learning, right? And finally, one of the final challenges is just the indiscriminate application of one's own cultural practices. This is very dangerous because we look and see how I do things, right? The way I do things, and I say, everybody should do it that way, right? This was a whole colonization, Western dominance, all of this. And this is an indiscriminate application of one's own cultural practices where we have to make sure that we address that. So finally, I think we are almost, we're wrapping up here. So when we look at this, the additional areas to consider when we are applying this, you want to just look in your own classroom. What are the training methods, accessibility? How can you adapt this to your own classroom? We also have to think about just the term itself, right? So the term intercultural competency is still a term that is kind of in formation because there can be what we call an implicit bias in that word, meaning that interculturally competent would mean that some people are competent and others are not. And this is not what we're trying to do. This is why some people call this intercultural effectiveness, or there might even be different terms that are used. Another idea is results, right? It's very difficult to measure and assess intercultural competence. It's not like taking a computer course where you just sign up and at the end you are interculturally competent, right? It is a method of growing and developing into a global citizen. And finally, global representation is very, very important. This idea, there's a lot of researchers that have come from the West. And so there's a lot of information from a Western perspective, and it's so important for all of you who are around the world who are interested in this field to contribute to the conversation, right? So that there truly is a global representation for intercultural competence. So finally, in conclusion, again, intercultural competence, empathy, this is a part, we're positioning ourselves as a representative of a particular cultural perspective, right? We are positioning ourselves to be a contributor in this global society as a part of a larger conversation. So in my perspective, the main component of intercultural is intercultural competence, ensuring that everyone has an equal voice and that we're always learners as well as educators. So every voice has a place. It's our responsibility as educators and as global citizens to help our students find that voice so that they, in turn, can contribute to this global conversation. They can highlight their own unique cultural traits and characteristics while applying this idea of global competency and that mindset as a part of their toolkit in the global world to ensure that their voice is heard. So I wanted to thank you all for who were here listening to this today. We can open this up for questions. I think we have a little bit more time left. I did leave my contact information here. Please do feel free to contact me directly if you have any questions or any further anything that you'd like to share on intercultural competence. So thank you all so much.
Thank you very much, Inga, for this interactive session and great ideas sharing. And yeah, the floor is open for the questions. If you have any questions, you can post them in the chat box. And for certificate, I've shared the feedback survey link. So if you fill up this feedback survey, you get your certificates. Please be patient with us. And so I'd like to also, mention this as Google Form accept limited number of responses. So if, your response is not accepted, try 24 hours later, and then hopefully it will work. And for our questions, I'm honored and privileged. One of my professors, Dr. Ghulam Ali Burdo, is attending the session, and he had a question. If I could ask you to unmute, sir, and you could ask your question. Yes, sir. Over to you. Okay, so meanwhile, we had a question from Sajida Banu. She asked about if intercultural competence or intercultural communication can be measured, or is it necessary to measure?
Mhm. It is not necessary to measure. It is something that we are developing, and you'll see in the field of intercultural competence, of course, people are working and researchers are working on ways to assess this. And the reason that that's happening is because we're trying to figure out how this, as a part of a curriculum, can be implemented in our school systems around the world, right? So for that reason, there are conversations about assessing. There's a lot of material that exists about ways to assess. But if you're looking to apply this in your classroom, right now, I'm saying just apply it. Whatever you're doing, you'll see with your students if they're becoming more globally competent, right? Or globally experienced. You'll see this in the dynamic that you see in the classroom, right? So I think it's more important. It's not as important to assess as it is to implement. Did I lose you?
No, it's great. So, when other question from Teresa Nomi, and she asked, which can be the examples of tasks to nurture ICC?
Okay, I'm sorry. What was the question again? I lost you for a second. Yes?
So she asks, which can be the examples of tasks to nurture intercultural competence?
Okay, some tasks. So some things that we can do in the classroom that are very easy. These are things that I do in my classroom with my students from around the world. If you have a mixed cultured classroom, even grouping, right? You're grouping them together and giving them activities to understand and share each other's culture. So for example, I'll have students who are in and they have to interview each other, and they're doing a presentation on each other's country. And they are becoming the other representative of their country. So for example, if I were doing this with Cuba, right? I would be the face of Cuba. I would have to learn, understand what is it like, and then get up and teach this to my class. If your students are all the same, you can do a similar exercise, right? This is just one example of how you can do this. You can do groupings and bring in different perspectives and ask them, what do you think about this point of view, right? This is how people are, these are all the different types of points of view on this topic. Why don't you think about them, explore them, see which one you agree with, do some research on them, provide some background into why these different ideas exist, right? So these are just a couple ideas of implementing this in the classroom.
Okay, so Khalik Zama has a hand raised, so I think he wants to ask a question. You are unmuted, Khalik, if you want. Your voice is not clear. So Mariam Khan wants to ask something. She is it. Yes, Mariam.
Okay. Hello, ma'am. This is Mariam Khan from Pakistan. I'm English language teacher and I'm a curriculum developer. I wanted to ask you that how can we, when we talk of empathy, how can we apply it in our classrooms when there's, when we are dealing with, critical analysis of things as well?
Assalamu alaikum.
Wa alaikum assalam. How are you? So good to hear from you.
So when we're looking to apply it, a lot of, when I was just, as I mentioned, I was just in Pakistan and I was speaking with a lot of different educators and Society for International Education and trying to understand the curriculum and what's being taught in the government systems. I know there's a lot of different types of schools and private schools. And so it's kind of, where is this coming in? So this is kind of in line with critical thinking and independent thought. So if you look at all of this together, right, and we're trying to see how to implement this in our classrooms, we're looking at ways to expand the thinking from it's this way. So many times in a lot of classrooms around the world, we have a very teacher-centered approach where the student is listening to the information and learning the information, memorizing the information and giving it back, right? And this is one method of learning.
Okay.
When we're starting to implement things like intercultural competence, empathy, we need to insert the emotion into that. And how do we insert the emotion? We start to ask questions of the student. The student has to start to think about some of these things on their own. And as a teacher, we can shift the focus to the student. So if the student, for example, is asking me a question about something, instead of me just giving the answer right away, I can ask them, how would that make you feel? What do you think about that? What is your perspective?
Dealing with their own perspective. That's right.
And so, and then having that continue the conversation. So you could say, wow, okay, yeah, that's a great idea. Okay, ask another student, what do you think about that? Or can you add to that? Or how would that make you feel? Right. So it's just shifting it back in a lot of ways. It becomes, it's reversing the traditional style of teacher-centered
approach. Yes. Thank you.
This is one way, this is, as I said, this is a new field. This is one way that it can be implemented, very much so.
And group learning and flipped classrooms, which are being applied these days, can also.
And this is what's necessary. When I was teaching in higher ed, I was teaching international students all around the world. And this is one area that many students from other countries are weak in sharing their own ideas, in feeling confident to express their own ideas, even if it's different from mine as the professor. And that's okay.
That's the easiest way to learn.
I'm sorry, Machenga. Yep. We have another question from Yoko. He asked, when students plan in a less culturally
Thank you, ma'am.
environment,
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
How can the teacher can effectively raise the students' cultural awareness?
By providing the environment, so we can raise the cultural awareness. But first of all, we have to understand as teachers, what is our awareness? There's a whole, we can think our own identity. Who are we in this conversation? And maybe I too need to learn a little bit, which I do. I realize I need to learn about a different culture before I can start to create an awareness. So once I feel it is creating the opportunity, giving the materials, looking online. We have so much online that's available from global perspectives. It's about providing multiple perspectives of a topic to a student. This is not to change a culture, okay, guys? This is the most important thing. This is not to say, the kids are going to lose their own culture. No, it's just helping them to understand their place in the world so that they can effectively communicate and be who they are in this global society, if that makes sense.
Great. So lastly, Salman Khan asked if you could share some of the resources, for ICC.
I have a great book right here, and I will share all this. I can put this in the chat. This is called Intercultural Competence in Higher Education, okay? This book in particular has a lot of case studies and ideas for implementation, not only in your classroom, but also in the school as a whole, in the curriculum. So there are a number of different resources, and I'm happy to share them with you through Emanuela. However we can get those out, I'm happy to do that.
Great. You can share the Drive link in the Facebook group, and so that everyone can access it.
Mm-hmm. I don't have the links right here because I'm going to have to type them up, but you can see in the, I do have a reference page at the end of my presentation that has 3 really good sources, and also at the bottom of the slides. So if you wanted to grab that right away, can you share that? Or let me see if I can share my screen again. Can I switch over? You can see here.
Sure, you can.
Okay. These are some of the top ones that I really find amazing. So this first book, this is the one I'm showing you, Intercultural Competence in the Higher Ed Classroom. This actually specifically will talk about empathy. It'll talk about different traits of different, areas of intercultural competence that you can, that are a component, and how you can add those into your classroom. Also, Ken Kushner is a huge one, talking about teacher as traveler. This is talking about the intersection of travel and education, and how study abroad and these kinds of global experiences truly help us in creating interculturally competent global citizens. So anyway, this is 2 different resources that I have listed here. There's 3 books, but 2 different resources within that I'm specifically looking at, that I can share with all of you. If you need more, then you have my contact information as well. Please reach out directly, and I'm happy to share additional.
So thank you very much, Inga, for this interesting session, and all these great ideas about intercultural competence and intercultural communication. And we hope that this way we will be able to bridge the gaps between different countries and communities, and especially create an environment where students do not feel sidelined, and everyone is welcomed and they enjoy being in their selves. So yeah, thanks very much. We appreciate your participation and offering this webinar. Thanks to all the attendees, and thank you very much to 3,000 YouTube subscribers. It's a great movement. Keep subscribing and sharing. As I earlier said, we still need 3,000 watchers. We have 17,000 Facebook members for the Teacher Development Webinars group, and if only 3,000 of you could watch 1 hour webinar, we could have this goal. So yeah, I would request you all to go watch your favorite webinars, and thumbs up. Thanks very much. I've already shared the feedback link in the chat, and if you want me to share again, I can do that. And meanwhile, you can follow us on social media platforms. We are available on Twitter, LinkedIn, Instagram, Facebook, YouTube, everywhere. So yeah, thanks very much. And
thank you again for everyone.
Thank you. And let me also remind you that due to this COVID-19, we are seeing this 3rd wave, and this is deadly and disturbing. So please follow the standard protocols, follow the SOPs, and try to be at home as much as possible. And this Eid, like last year's Eid, is gonna be different. So during this Eid festival, and try to be at your home with your loved ones and family, and avoid these big gatherings so that we can flatten the curve and act like a responsible citizen. I would say, we should all act maturely and be responsible for our lives, for everyone's life. So thank you so very much. Stay safe, everyone. Take